Welcome to the Kerrville Bible Church Pastors Podcast, where we seek to further equip you for the work of ministry by discussing a variety of biblical, theological, and practical topics. Stick around until the end of the episode to learn how you can submit a question for us to answer on the podcast.
Welcome to the Kerrville Bible Church Pastors Podcast, and I am not Toby Baxley, but I am your host, Chris McKnight, with Scott Christensen and Mary Van Gundy. Toby is a little bit under the weather, so he has given us free reign here in the studio.
Video instruction.
Video instruction. With the video.
We don't even know if it's recording right now, but you're doing well. You look good in that seat.
The red light is on, and the little sound bars are bouncing around, so we have to hope that it's recording. Did he say I had to push anything on there to record?
I don't think so.
I think it was just there. So we're going to trust that it's recording. And I'm also the topic host today. So we want to talk about something that's very, very practical and is kind of a spinoff or implication of some of the sermons I've been preaching on biblical manhood, womanhood. And part of those sermons is I had said, biblically speaking, all things being equal, if God's called you to be married, that's your desire, and you're pursuing that in your life, that if the Lord would will, we would believe biblically, just being biblically informed and having a biblical instinct, that it would be better to be married closer to 20 than 30. And because primarily, or one of the reasons, is that's adulthood, and that's your most fertile years of childbearing and child rearing time. So kind of goes back to the be fruitful and multiply mandate of creation, Genesis 1 and 2. So that's part of the reason for this podcast. Another reason was one of our elders, Carson Conklin, informed me the other day, said, hey, you got to go listen to Al Mohler's briefing from Friday, because he's talking about some of the same things you've just been saying in the sermons. And so Al Mohler interacted with a Wall Street Journal article again on this cultural trend, right? Sociological trend. He said the median age for men now is 30 and women's 29. Getting married, and he had a really good podcast on that from Friday. Talked about how people, instead of getting married young and building a life together, they're building their own life for, say, a decade, right? Education, career, maybe even buy your own first house, right, as a single person. And then they're trying to bring these two kind of established lives and bringing those together in marriage, and all the challenges that could bring, versus let's get married young and have buy our first car, buy our first house, have all of this happen as we grow together and grow up together into young adulthood and so forth. So I texted you guys, right? And let me just run through the questions that I sent you. Yeah, about 100 podcasts ago, we talked on this subject. It was actually before my sabbatical, so it had been 2023. We had a similar podcast, but I can't remember anything that was said. And
I can't remember. Somebody else on a Wednesday, they're like, hey, I really enjoyed the podcast. I'm like, what was it about?
That's what I say. That was just a day ago.
Yeah.
So here's some of the things I want us to talk about, guys. Getting married young, pros and cons. How young is too young? When are young people ready for marriage? Should parents support a young married couple financially after the wedding, or should all financial support end when a couple gets married? What about education, higher education, obviously, post high school? Getting prepared to support yourself or your family. What about honoring parents and their wishes on these things? And is their blessing... Is the parental blessing and the blessing of the father, is that required biblically? Is that essential? What would be our thoughts on some of that stuff? So we have an interesting mix. I regret that Toby's not here, because this just happened in Toby and Melissa's life. We just had a wedding this past Saturday in our church, and it was Toby and Melissa's firstborn, Garrett, and he's 21, and he married McKenna, and she's 23. I know Scott's got 4 sons. 3 of them are married. And we'll talk about, you'll share a little bit in a minute, Scott, like their age when they got married a little bit. And Murray's got a son and a daughter, and so these things are on their horizon. And I've got 2 two sons that are married, and they both, I was trying to remember how old they were, and I think they were both 21. Caleb had just graduated college and got married 3 weeks later. Carson was actually about halfway through college. His wife had finished. He hadn't finished, and he hit pause on his education, and they got married, and he had just turned 21 and she's about the same age. So that's a little bit of our collective background on this. So just throw it out there, guys. What are some of your thoughts on this, some of these questions, and how young is too young? How do we know when Christian young people are ready to be married? Scott, your boys. They've all three of them are married. How old were they?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't recall the exact ages that they were married. All three of our boys got married almost within a year of each other.
Flurry of weddings. Yes.
Yeah, and so I want to say our youngest was about 21, and then 22 and 23, 24. The oldest when they got married. In that plus or minus a year or so. I'd have to go back and do the math. But certainly they were all, I believe, under the age of 25. Our oldest, I think, was no older than 25 when he got married. And our third youngest, Luke, I think he was 21 when he got married. And and so, yeah, we were excited to see them get married at a young age. I remember some years ago, before any of them got married, I think Daniel was still in college, and we heard Al Mohler do a whole sermon or an address, I think, to college students on this whole subject, and I'd love to go back and listen to that again. But he really strongly encouraged, getting married young. Mm-hmm. As young as reasonable and possible, and we had all our boys listen to that because we fully agreed that delaying marriage is not healthy. It's not healthy in terms of adulthood and learning to become responsible adults. There's something about marriage that forces you, I think, to think about other people in ways that when you're single, you tend to just be very selfish and self-focused, self-centered. And the longer you wait to get married, the harder I think it is to break some of those self-centered habits and can be detrimental, to the marriage. And plus I think, have children when you're young enough to have the energy,
yes.
To raise those children. As you start getting, like you said, into those later years, I mean, you don't have the energy that you have as a young person to have children and care for them.
Right. Properly. One of the things you touched on that Al Mohler talks about in his most recent briefing is traditionally, historically, marriage was kind of seen simultaneous or parallel to becoming an adult. That part of adulting, part of taking on adult responsibilities, being viewed by a culture and a society and a community as an adult, was you got married. Mm-hmm. And how that has been set aside in our culture now. That has just been pushed way down the road where we're recognizing an adulthood, long before people get married. Obviously, if the median age is 30, So I thought that was an interesting point that he made, just historically how it's been viewed, and it also stretches out the whole thing of adolescence, right? Mm-hmm. That we've talked about in sermons, and how you said it. You got to think about other people, and it's kind of sink or swim. It's going to force you, especially as a young man, to learn some responsibilities that you would have never learned otherwise. And those who swim, they embrace that. Mm-hmm. They grow up fast. They mature. Those who aren't ready, I guess, to make that kind of commitment, it gets exposed really fast because we have to recognize there are people who get married that weren't ready to get married. That's a reality, right? They didn't have the right teaching, the right training, the right expectations. They weren't equipped. So we have to recognize that is a possibility. And I think we have to recognize that there is a possibility of marrying too young. It's
or rushing into marriage, without giving adequate thought to what all that means.
Right, which you could do at any age.
Yeah.
And I think so. Let's talk about that for a second. What do you guys see as what are the circumstances when somebody rushes into marriage? Like what do we mean by that?
Yeah, I'm not even really sure. So I think it'd be interesting if Al Mohler were able to, or somebody else, to see like what the median age now in just across the board is 30 for males, 29 for females. But it'd be interesting to see what about within the church, with the evangelical church, what is the age? Is that going up with the secular, which I imagine it probably is, or has there been a kind of a new revolution of people who are really, born again, sold out to Christ, sold out to the church, sold out to purity, who are living that life and want to get married early, So I think it's hard to tell what is, I don't know that I've seen enough marriages to be able to give an opinion on when is early marriage too early, There's an age, natural age of, our society uses 18 as a quote unquote adulthood. We know a lot of people who are over 18 who don't act like adults. I would say the few marriages I know of that have been under 20, they act more like an adult now than they did before they got married, which is what Scott's saying. It kind of forces you to grow up, right? It forces, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. We're taking a perspective from a biblical evangelical worldview, right? A Christian worldview as to what's too young, what's not too young. And so that perspective, because is it possible for sure that somebody who it doesn't follow Christ, they've whatever reason and they get married? Yeah, I mean, that could be a disaster waiting to happen. But I think two people who are clearly have even more than a credible testimony, but are clearly following Christ, in most cases been pure before marriage, all those things. I don't know. I can't answer what's too early.
But we have to acknowledge there is a too early.
Yeah,
we could get ridiculous.
What is that?
Yeah, we could get ridiculous and say, we met last week and we want to get married.
Sure.
Right now.
So
right.
Yeah, I say what you said. Rush it. I like that word better. Rushing into marriage.
Right.
I think that terminology sounds better. Rushing into marriage, versus weighing it and being taught by both sides of the parents, by being taught by your church, by somebody who would maybe do the premarital counseling, whatever that might be. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So I like that.
Yeah.
Well, and on the opposite end of that spectrum, you can have young people that date for extended periods of time, and if the relationship is of a nature that it looks like marriage and everything seems to check, all the boxes for marriage. Why are you delaying, getting married? You're placing yourself in certainly in danger, sexually and whatnot, if you delay marriage too long.
Right.
And so, why are you delaying?
Right.
At that point, and typically you'll have people say, "Well, I need to finish my education, or I need to start making more money," and Al Mohler obviously brought that out, that people are waiting until they feel like they're financially stable enough to get married, and I have issues with that. My youngest son has 3 children. And, he was, like I said, I believe he was 21 when he got married. And, they have 3 children and he's still in his mid-20s. And, are they financially stable. I don't even know what that means. He makes decent amount of money, but I wouldn't say that he's by any means rich. They live in a 2-bedroom apartment, and they're just, getting by,
Sure.
but it's a struggle for them, and we've talked with them about that. But they understand that. They know, they knew what they were getting into, and they had some help early on, with her parents, Sierra's parents. They lived with them for a while, so that helped them out financially, and now they're in their own apartment. But
the struggle's good.
But yeah.
Right? There's something good about the struggle.
There's something very good about the struggle.
I don't think you want any young couple to start off in abject poverty, right? You don't want them to just be starving, homeless. I mean, you could have the ridiculous examples. That's not what we're talking about. But there is a good struggle of, man, we are so tight. We got to be very
and struggling
frugal,
together.
Struggling
That's kind
together.
of the thing, right?
Right.
You're struggling together. That's what I've always, since I became a youth pastor 23 years ago and had the opportunity to counsel young people through this conversation, is like there's something sweet about the struggle together, right? There's something sweet to look back 10 years ago in your marriage. Go, remember when we had our coffee table was a piece of wood and 2 cinder blocks, Remember that when we only ate such and such, there's something good about that struggle in a godly sense, right? In a godly sense that these are two people who love the Lord, who want to point their future spouse to Christ, who all those things that check the non-negotiable boxes for a spouse, right? There's something sweet about that. And I think at the end of the day also, marriage across the board is difficult.
Yeah.
It's a dying to self. It's going to be, and in some regards, what we're even arguing the point, it can be more difficult starting too late. Right, because you've had these two worlds.
Exactly.
Where Al Mohler says in that podcast, he says, versus building your individual life and then bringing those two together. What about building a life together? He said something, about my wife and I made our first major purchase together. We bought our first home together, very small, little humble home, but doing that together, there's something very sweet about that our culture and society frowns upon.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I think the reality is you no matter the age, you could rush into the biggest decision you would ever make in your life outside of Christ.
Yeah, that's what you said.
This is the biggest decision, the biggest commitment you will ever make as a Christian, and you could rush into that at any age. What does that look like? It looks like I don't know this person. I don't know what they believe. I don't know what they value. I don't know their personality well. They don't know me. I think that's what it would look like. I'm rushing into, I'm infatuated.
Yeah, man, I'm just attracted to
I'm
them.
attracted. I'm overwhelmed by lust. And so I'm rushing towards something, and I don't even really know who I'm marrying, and I don't even know what marriage is. That would be rushing. I haven't had premarital counseling. I haven't had a foundation laid as to what is the nature of this commitment. What is marriage? Who created it? All that stuff, right? So that is absolutely a possibility, and we probably all know somebody who's done that. We know people who had a failed first marriage that divorced, and I've heard this story many times. It's either I didn't know the person, or I had no idea what I was doing. What marriage was.
What really marriage was.
Yeah. So you got that, and then on the other hand, you can wait too long. You can have this delay. I mean, my roommate in college, 4-year roommate, I knew him in high school. When we were seniors in high school, he started dating a sophomore. They dated for 7 years.
Wow.
Because she had finished high school. That's 3. And then she went to college and went to a separate college from him. That's 4 more. And I don't know the ins and outs. I don't know if that was her parents' requirement. I don't know what brought all that about. They were both professing Christians. I don't know that they were for sure, but anyway, 7 years, and then they finally got married. And I can't imagine the challenge that was for them from a purity standpoint, right? It's so long, way too long in my mind, right? So yeah, I think you can go too fast, you can go too slow. There's a sweet spot in the middle of where it's reasonable, where it's prudent, where you've gotten good counsel from parents, from pastors, elders, friends, godly friends, right, speaking into the situation. I like to always ask that question of a young couple, especially a young couple. What do your parents think of this? What do your friends that know both of you think of this? Do they approve? Do people that know you well, what are their thoughts? What kind of feedback are you getting there? And just to fill out the picture, of what's going on.
Yeah, is this a toxic relationship, right?
Right.
Young people are engaged in many toxic relationships,
Right.
yet they're still hanging on to this idea of, well, we should, that's bad news.
Right, exactly.
That's bad news.
You could have even early evidences and elements of abuse that we've talked about in these podcasts that are already starting in a dating relationship that are just going to get way, way worse.
Yes.
Right.
When that becomes marriage and the person feels kind of trapped, So there's a lot to think through there. So let's transition to a little bit as to where we all are, on this today as parents. So what are y'all's thoughts on parents' blessing? The traditional, I don't know that it's explicitly biblical, but the traditional, the young man that's going to marry the young woman goes to her father and asks for his hand. You guys haven't had that. I haven't had this, but you may have this. That young man comes to you and says, "I want to marry your daughter."
Yeah.
And do I have your blessing? Do I have your permission? How do we feel about that? What's our
Is it required? Right? Is it required? What is really happening? I think it's an honest. I think an honest effort on the young man who's going to that father to say, you brought it up in the wedding on Saturday, the Baxley's wedding, kind of this transfer of authority, this transfer of responsibility from we would say this in our home, that you are telling our daughter, you are not under another man, you're not under your boyfriend's authority. You are not, when it says submit to your husbands, respect you're not under that until that you are under my authority as the father in your life, the man in your life, until you get married, right? So if he's pushing that, because I've known a lot of good intended Christian young men who are telling their girlfriends, like, you got to submit, and all this, and they're like, whoa, I mean, it costs them the relationships.
Right.
I've seen it multiple times, not that long ago either, that cost them the relationship, because you're like, dude, what are you doing? Like, no, you don't. They don't.
You're getting
submit.
ahead.
You're getting ahead here.
You're ahead of yourself.
You came from a fundamental background or whatever, and you're ready to just say, oh yes, you will submit to me. Like, no, that just cost you that girl that you thought you loved.
Right.
So I think that there's an honest effort on the young man's part to do that. Is it biblical or not? I mean, I have not studied it to know, is that biblical? Like, is that a mandate?
Yeah.
It
feels like it's one of those things that's a biblical impulse, kind of a biblical implication versus chapter and verse.
Yeah, mandate.
Because there is the especially if we're talking about a young person just coming out of their home, certainly biblically, her father was the head of that home and her authority, along with all the other children. And so if you're going from your home into marriage, there is this clear biblical inference of, I'm going from submission to my father to submission to my husband, though being very, very careful that this person I'm marrying is not in a father role to me. He's in a husband role. We become one, and all of those things. So,
because dad at that time was protector and provider, and there's a transfer of now my husband is protector and provider.
Right. Yeah. So,
I think in an ideal situation, you're going to have two believers, that are getting married that have believing families. Yeah. And I think it makes it obviously easier in those circumstances. That was, I believe, the case with all three of our sons. It was my case when I married Jennifer. Her dad was a pastor, and I felt it's my duty to ask him for her hand in marriage. And all three of my sons, pretty certain they all did that, and because they all married wives that were in Christian families. Right. And so it just seemed like this is what needs to happen.
That's a good point. Yeah. They're in Christian families, so there's an expectation and a hope and a desire that those things would happen and happen appropriately, right?
Right.
And really, there's a place for it even before that. I want to marry your daughter. I mean,
Yeah.
there's really a place for that conversation of I would like to date your daughter.
Yeah.
And,
Exactly.
And give that father an opportunity to say, well, what are your intentions?
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
what are your intentions? But
And because it does respect the authority of the father,
Right.
particularly in the life of the young woman.
Yeah.
And the man that wants to marry him needs to respect that authority of the father until that transfer
Yes.
of connection takes place.
Right. Yeah. I know my boys certainly did that with their wives' fathers, and I remember doing it with Kim. So when we were about to get engaged, we were in Chattanooga, and her parents were in Miami, Florida, and so it was impossible at the time to be face to face. So it had to happen over the phone.
Yeah.
And Kim's dad could be pretty intimidating in a lot of ways. And I remember I thought I was going to get a positive answer, but you're
Yeah.
still very nervous. And
Yeah.
I remember calling and saying, he answered the phone. I mean, Kim's dad was so protective that he always answered the phone at their house.
Mm.
Back in the days of the landline, the phone rang.
Yeah.
He was the only one who could answer if he was there. That was part of his protection mode, and they had strict curfews and all kinds of stuff. But I remember calling him and said, "Mr. Duncan, it's Chris McKnight," and he just cut me off. He said, "Oh, bless your heart."
Take her.
Like he knew what was coming.
Take her.
And
He's like, I've been waiting for this call.
Kim had an older sister and younger sister. They were both already married, so they got out of order. And her younger sister married at 18. And,
Wow.
And
Wow.
Jimmy was 19. And I was 25 and Kim was 23, about to turn 24. And so, yeah, it was, well, bless your heart.
Bless you.
So Mr. Duncan, I'm just calling because I love your daughter Kim and I want to marry her. And he just said, well, I have one question for you. Are you going to take care of her? Are you going to love
Provide
her,
for her.
take care of her? And I said, oh, yes, sir. So,
Awesome.
and so, yeah, it was great. You can, we were talking about just that key question and how nervous we were. So I think there's a biblical impulse there because Christian men and Christian families, as Scott was saying, has an expectation of that. And I think that's fair and needs to be honored.
I think even if you're marrying, in a situation where you're, obviously you want to not be unequally yoked. So, you're marrying a Christian woman, but maybe her parents aren't believers. I think depending on the circumstances, if she has, reasonably good and they're reasonably good and faithful parents and there's not serious issues with them or whatever, that I think is still good to do that. And it becomes a testimony to her parents of, your willingness to understand those authority structures, which aren't just specifically designed for Christian families. This is God's design. It's a creational thing. God's design for marriage is not just for Christians. I mean, marriage is a good institution, period.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be a Christian to get married. And so I think it still respects those creational foundations,
Right.
of marriage.
What do y'all think about parents supporting married young children, young people,
Post marriage.
Post marriage, so you get into situations where there could be education going on. There could be educational costs. One or both could be in college or school. One or both could be in some type of vocational training, learning to be a dental hygienist or a welder or a mechanic or whatever it may be. And as Christian parents, you were praying for your kids to have a spouse, and then God seems to bring them along, and they're 18, 19, 20 years old, and they want to get married, but they're not ready for really to provide for themselves into the future. And so what are our thoughts on let's say the dad of the wife supporting her education or supporting them, or the other parent supporting his education, supporting them? What principles bear on this question? Because I think this in our culture and what it takes to survive economically, and young people have no idea how much it takes. I mean, they have no idea how much money it takes. Really, it does. And even though we're struggling and all those things, life takes a lot more money than most young people understand.
Oh, for sure.
And it takes a whole lot more
Especially
work.
now, right? It's even more.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's absolutely.
that was the big Charlie Kirk push was like, man, we have got to, our society is in disarray because young people can't afford a home, right?
Right. Can't afford
just
anything.
normal expenses,
right. How much work it's going to take, how much work marriage is going to take, how much work it's going to take for you to get ahead financially in this world. And so with all those realities, that kind of crashes up against a young getting married young. So should they be helped? What are your thoughts on that? Is that a liberty issue? Is that a case by case issue, or is there?
I think a case by case liberty issue. I think it's the fear for the parents is that they're just going to constantly be on the feeding tube.
On the payroll.
You know what I mean?
Right.
We're going to be on the and they'll never grow up because we just keep doing everything for them. Right. I think that's possible for sure and happens. And then causes division within the husband and wife, the mom and dad who are doing it, right? Because the mom maybe really wants to help out more, and the dad's like, nope, they need a sink or swim, and you know what I mean. That causes division. So I think that's a relevant fear. I don't think so. That's a possibility, but let's not talk about that. Let's just talk about a practical. Hey, we want to be able to help or not help because we want them to learn to grow up. I think. It all depends on the financial means of the parents, right? I mean, like in our case, we were fortunate enough to invest money early to have our kids' college paid for, right? And so we're not going to restrict that based on getting married early or not getting married early, right? You're not going
to penalize,
right? We're not going to penalize that.
You're not getting this, right.
But we're also not going to say, hey. We're also going to fund your summers, so that you can just enjoy jumping in the river like you did last year or whatever. Right. No, I mean, you're going to have to get a job, probably get a part-time job while you're in school, not against student loans if you have to, whatever that might be. And so I think, it's a case by case and liberty and how those parents think. But my wife and I, in no way want to use it to teach a lesson or punish. We're not going to do that. That's just not us. It's not our personality. It's not the way we think. We don't think we're gonna really show them that. Oh, well, you want to know how hard it is? We'll show you how hard it is. Maybe to a fault we've done that. I don't think we've spoiled our kids in a like they're brats, but we also are not purposefully going to cause undue stress.
Right.
In their lives. So.
Yeah, I think if you extend too much help, you can certainly hamstring
delay it
that marriage, and sometimes you've got issues of beholdenness to parents or whatever, and it can be a manipulative kind of tactic too. Strings attached sort of kind of thing. Yeah. I'll give you this money if you guys do this,
right.
And then you're missing that leave and cleave aspect that I think is really important. And I think that whole issue is important even in how you handle that because you've got to allow that young couple to learn to be on their own. And so if you're funding them too much, they don't learn the hard realities that, they've got to learn to make it on their own. They've got to learn how to budget their money in a way that's reasonable and not expecting,
right.
parents to bail them out.
Right.
And so every situation has to be evaluated on its own terms, I believe. And, I think it's great and wonderful and gracious for parents to help young couples, in reasonable ways. And,
right.
and I think you just have to use some wisdom in how you do that.
And you got to use some wisdom and I would say constant evaluation because the train wreck situation, the nightmare you want to avoid is wife goes to husband and says, I would like X, Y, Z. Husband says, we can't afford it. So she turns around and asks her dad.
Oof.
Right? Dad can't afford it.
No way,
he's
no.
like, right? Isn't that horrible? I mean, just think about that. It's like, oh, well,
just completely
dad
usurped your husband's role.
And that happens. And I think this is where, we're going to help you. And I think it needs to be spelled out plainly, maybe even in writing. It's like we're gonna help, and we're going to evaluate that, because we don't want our help to be a hindrance to their oneness, to their union, to their roles, to their growing up, all the stuff we're talking about. That could come into play.
I mean, it could go down to something as simple and ridiculous as, going to dinner. You're married,
right?
Maybe even have one or two kids, and your parents live out of town, and you go to their home, and then you all go out to dinner. Are you expecting mom and dad to pay for the bill? Are you willing to say, hey, we could go Dutch, or hey, let us pick it up this time? I know for me personally, I loved going to as a grown man, full job, I love going to dinner with my mom and stepdad, and they were gracious. But we did, we would not, it wasn't a 1-for-1 for sure. It was probably a 5-for-1. I loved going to when I was early adulthood, already graduated college, and I wasn't married yet, but go visit my mom. She'd take me shopping at the Walmart or whatever, and I could get all my the toiletries are so expensive, so you stock up on your deodorants and your razors and all the stuff that you don't want to spend your own money. Mom was great to do that, and it's kind of funny.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff goes on with all of that. We're living that right now. I was just, as you were talking about that, I was just thinking, if we went out to eat with our kids and I asked them to pay for it, I might not live through the end of that meal.
Because of your wife.
My wife would.
She'd kill you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, if we're with them for several days and we've paid for several meals, I'll finally, at some point, I'll step in and say, hey, they need to pay for themselves. We're going Dutch here.
Yeah.
I will never let them pay for us, ever. But we're going to go Dutch here.
Yeah.
And they're on their own, and she will begrudgingly
I love it.
When we do, we try to lay things out, in a rough, not in a real rigid way, but when we have family get-togethers and whatnot, we try to at least lay out, hey, we'll pay for this, but you guys need to do this, and
cover it up front so there's no animosity.
And so that there's a clear understanding of what the expectations are in those family situations. And
I think it's nice to it's a blessing to get to bless, right? It is a blessing to have your son who has 3 kids and he isn't even 26 yet, maybe, and so it's a blessing to get to treat them to something that they wouldn't normally get to do, right? But it also isn't hey, we're going to pay your bills for you, right? We're not going to enable you to not work hard, that we don't ever want to do that. That's not loving, to enable them to be lazy and know, my mom and dad will cover it, so.
Okay. Quick hitter. One pro, one con of marrying young. Pros of marrying young. And let's call young 20. I'm just going to say 20 because Al Mohler's
say
thing.
20.
Yeah, he would go right up to 20. He wouldn't go below that. But let's say 20.
I say 18's like the floor, and maybe 22, 23 is the ceiling in this early, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I think in between would be 20 would be it, right in the middle.
What's a pro of getting married at the age of 20?
Man, just the biggest pro is getting to start life together. And now we're talking about 2 followers of Christ, right?
Correct.
And so just getting to do life together and start that journey together and have less external distractions and factors that from a secular American dream viewpoint we see as positive, but can actually be a negative. It's like, let's start together. Yeah. And we love this, and we're going to lock arms, and we're going to go through the ups and downs of life together, and that strength that galvanizes a marriage, right? I think like you say, you look back a decade later and go, wow, look how the Lord provided for us. We didn't even talk about that. Like, look how the Lord took care of us in a time where we didn't think we had enough money to even eat, and the Lord took care of us.
Let's take a side trail on this for a minute, because we're talking about Christian people and Christian families, and our number one thing as Christians is we trust God, right? And so I think what's up against the culture saying you got to get your education in place, you got to get your career in place, get 5 years into your career, maybe even buy your first home, where we say, no, we're going to trust God. We're going to trust God to provide. We're going to trust God to open up doors for jobs and take care of us and all those things. Not being foolish, not presuming on the Lord, but the issue of faith. So I think, we need to talk about this, because when we're talking about marrying young, we've got to bring faith into that picture.
Yeah, that's everything.
There's no explanation for why this should work.
Yeah.
apart from God.
That's right.
And so, I mean, I think you're talking about that. We married a little older. I was 25, just turned 25. Kim was 23. We got married, and 2 weeks later, moved 2,300 miles away to Southern California. 2 weeks later. We had $10,000 in the bank. We had one car. We had no jobs. We had nowhere to live, and we didn't know a single person there. And we said, we're trusting God.
Yeah.
We're trusting God that when we get there, we'll find a place to live. We'll find jobs. And we were a month in before we both found our jobs. I mean, you talk about a crucible. You talk about the gold getting refined. And we both get jobs within a week of each other. And we're off and running. So the first 4 years of our married life were all of our families in Tennessee and Alabama. We're in Southern California. I'm working almost full-time, school full-time. She's working full-time. Caleb is born year 3. She comes home from work because that was our commitment from day one. We don't care what it takes. She's coming home.
Awesome.
And our $10,000 savings went away in 9 months. And I graduated, and we moved.
Wow. The Lord's timing.
The Lord's timing. And the Lord took care of us.
Yeah.
And we moved to a ministry job, and we were taken care of, and we've always been taken care of.
And God bless your wife, man. Wow. That's awesome.
And
she supported you through that.
She let me drive the whole way, too. She sat in the passenger seat all the way to California. The only time she went to sleep was Kansas. Kansas was just too flat
enough.
Too flat
Too
for her.
Too flat. Nothing to look at.
She went to sleep, but otherwise, it was great.
So
memory.
that's a pro. And then con would be just, you're just not ready. You're just, I think it's that, because early is a very relative term. So I think you're just not ready. You haven't done what we've already talked about. It's what Scott said about rushing into it, and you don't really know this person, and it's simply based or mostly based on attraction and lust, and versus emotions, versus really based on Christ and having some good wisdom spoken into your life, So I'd say the con is it just rushed into it.
How old were you when you got married?
27.
27. Get saved at 25, married at 27.
Yeah.
Pros and cons. Anything to add to that?
I would say one of the pros is that it reinforces the biblical model of interpersonal commitment. What I mean by that, I think of like the one another passages. Okay. So much of the Christian life and so much of our sanctification is rooted in interpersonal relationships. And so the earlier you get married, the quicker you're able, I think, to begin to build these patterns of the one another's. Okay. If you delay marriage, and this is, I was 28 when I got married, and if I went back, I would say no. That was too long, because I had become so selfish and so self-centered in my single life that it was extremely difficult for me to learn how to live with someone else and to think about that person's needs and to think about what I need to do, for her. And it was a struggle for me for a couple of years, and I think there were even longer term effects of that because I had become so settled in certain ways of thinking only of myself that it did make made our marriage difficult for several years.
Right.
But I think a con of getting married too early is immaturity. And I think a lot of this goes back to parenting. Now, again, if we're looking at an ideal situation, you've got Christian parents trying to raise Christian children, that you're trying to teach your children levels of responsibility early on so that when they've graduated high school, they're ready. You're launching them, into adulthood. And if you have prepared them to be responsible in their teen years and even younger, obviously,
right.
Then they're going to be mature to get married at a young age. Unfortunately, I think we find ourselves with a lot of young people who are just extremely immature and don't understand what responsibility means.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's good. Yeah, there's I think of the pro of just the purity battle. Of course, that's enters into it. If you burn, let him marry. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7. So that definitely has got to enter into the equation. Here's another thought: the elongated dating. How many? I mean, this is kind of weird because it overlaps with God's sovereignty and our responsibility and all that, but. If you date too long, you're going to eventually probably find something about that other person that's going to possibly end the relationship.
Right.
Where you really should have just committed to marriage.
Yeah.
I think this is what's happening in our culture. There are people these long-term dating relationships.
Right, and then they live together first, right?
They live together, and then eventually they play out, and they never get married, and they move on to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And so I think something can be said for I need to know you well enough, but I don't need to drag this out forever because dragging this out forever might just prevent us getting married.
Right, and then you got to start that process all over again.
So even potentially, this is where I kind of laughing at myself. I'm even potentially missing who God had for me because I waited too long.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, at some point,
For sure.
you just got to make the commitment. I know what I know. The rose-colored glasses are off. I've seen this person sick. I've seen them weak. I've seen them sinful. I know what their tendencies are. They know what mine are. We don't have any huge surprises coming down the road, and I need to make that commitment and stop waffling. And I'm committed to you till we die. Idea, and now I'm ready. Now I'm ready for marriage.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me. I don't know that there's any statistics that would indicate this, but it would seem to me that the longer the dating, whatever that means, dating period is, I would say probably there's going to be a correspondingly less, degree of success in a marriage where they dated way too long. Whereas people who date a shorter period of time, they're probably going to stay married.
Yeah,
I don't know if there's
I don't know what the stat
there.
is. There's for sure a stat that includes cohabitating, right? That
certainly.
Increases
and no, there
divorce.
are stats on that.
Yeah, that increases divorce, which is crazy.
People that cohabitate before marriage and then get married, they're typically
and the world
at great risk.
And even in some Christian circles, they're advocates for that. Like, hey, you gotta know, like, are you even sure? Like, you haven't smelt their breath in the morning. You haven't, and that's just horrific. And statistically, the statistics prove that is bad. That is bad. So it ties into what you're saying, Chris. Is like, hey, some of it is like. Let's do it before
we learn too much.
Yeah, in a good way. And then unfortunately, and I think prudently, I understand this. Yeah. We don't talk enough about and teach enough about and in the church just because it's so taboo about the idea of purity, right? Yeah. About the struggle. You date too long, the struggle, and are we setting them up to fail?
Yeah.
Are we setting them up to say we hold this ideal? Yeah. Above purity. Yeah. And so in some cases, maybe we kind of sweep under the rug the fact that maybe there was some impurity, but for the fact of XYZ, versus like, that's a real thing. God created it. Right. He put it in us for a reason. Yeah. And the main reason starts with procreation. Right. And so, I think that's a big thing that needs to be factored in that I think is pretty taboo to talk about.
No, right. We say we're praying for purity. We want purity. We're teaching purity. Of course, it's not the unforgivable sin. If you weren't, God forgives and God uses all things to work together for our good. But we're praying for that. We want that as parents, and Christian young people want that. But then we say, but we want you to wait 5 years.
So you're 24.
7 years.
25.
Right. We put this too long of a delay, and you just really have thrown them into an impossible situation.
Yeah.
These long and indeterminate engagements, like we're engaged. When's the date? Oh, we don't have a date yet.
Yeah.
I just cringed. I just cringed. I mean, this thing needs to have a termination point. 6 months or less, in my opinion. But here's another pro, I think, to marrying young. Al Mohler talks about it. You're marrying into your most fertile years for women, certainly.
Right.
And so it just plays right into the creation mandate of be fruitful and multiply. Just statistically guaranteed, all things else being equal, you get married at 20, versus getting married at 30. You're going to have more kids if you get married at 20 than if you got married at 30. That's just going to be the reality of it. And we think more kids is good and it's better. And so
it's biblical.
It's biblical. And so that plays into it as well as a pro, I think.
One other issue, and we probably got to wrap this up, but one other issue that I think is what is your philosophy of dating?
Right.
And we've always tried to teach our children that, you date someone because you're trying to determine whether or not this is someone you want to marry.
That's right.
In other words, this sort of casual dating culture,
right.
I think gets a lot of people in trouble and gets a lot of Christians in trouble. And then that raises the question, well, how early should you allow your children to start dating? And that can be a controversial question. Mm-hmm. But if you have as your philosophy, okay, you're dating in order to see whether or not you're compatible with this person to get married, that might have something to say about how long you delay the dating.
It all goes together.
Yeah. We live in a try before you buy culture, right? And that's just antithetical to the Bible.
So, okay, we are at the 50-minute mark. So
wow.
Good discussion, guys. Thanks
Great hosting. Man,
thanks
you
for
killed
your
it.
Encouragement
you killed
for
it.
me. And
how long would this have gone had Toby been with us?
I don't know. Yeah. Only God knows. And I'm just sitting here this whole time thinking, I sure hope I wasn't supposed to push this other red button.
I think that's the backup.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure.
All right. You're good. So we're good. We have
That's
a recording.
what I think.
We have a recording.
I know nothing about nothing. But.
I know nothing. I'll pray us out. Lord, thanks for the discussion. Thank you for the institution of marriage you've created, male and female, you created them, and for the mandate to be fruitful and multiply under the covenant of marriage. Thank you for that. Thank you that you've allowed the three of us and Toby and Melissa to be fruitful and to have children, and Lord, for Scott and I to have grandchildren, and what a blessing that is as we see our children having children. So thank you for that. Lord, pray that this will be helpful to all of our listeners. Pray, Lord, for those listeners that are single by choice or not by choice, single as widows or even young people, that you would show them that their life is extremely valuable as well in your sight, and that they can serve you in an undistracted way that a married person can't, and that they are blessed right now with that season of life, and may they make the most of it. And for those singles that want to get married, Lord, we pray that you would provide for them as only you can. Thank you for this time in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks for listening to the Kerrville Bible Church Pastors Podcast. We want to be a resource for you and answer the questions that are on your mind. Please send them to us via email at questions@kerrvillebiblechurch.org or call or text us at 830-321-0349.